Frank Sinatra was 3 verses into My Way when his eyes caught something that made his voice falter. Front row, left side. A young man in military dress uniform sitting alone at a small table. The uniform was crisp, perfectly pressed. The medals gleamed under the stage lights, but something was wrong. The left sleeve of the uniform was pinned up. Empty. The young man's left arm was gone from just below the shoulder. Frank's voice cracked on the word, regrets. The orchestra kept playing, but Frank had stopped singing. His eyes were locked on the soldier. The young man wasn't looking at Frank. He was staring down at his drink, his right hand wrapped around the glass. His jaw was tight. His shoulders were rigid. He looked like he was trying to disappear. Frank set the microphone back in its stand. The music continued for a few more bars before the conductor noticed and cut the band off. 1,200 people in the Caesar's Palace showroom went silent. Frank stood at center stage, one hand shading his eyes from the spotlight, looking directly at the young soldier. "What's your name, son?" Frank's voice carried across the silent room. The soldier looked up, startled. He hadn't expected to be noticed. Nobody ever wanted to notice him, not since he came back. "Sir? Your name, what is it?" The soldier hesitated, then quietly, "Romano. Sergeant Michael Romano, sir." "Where'd you serve, Michael?" "Vietnam, sir. 1st Cavalry Division." Frank nodded slowly. Then he did something nobody in that audience expected. He walked off the stage, not backstage. He walked down the steps and straight toward Michael Romano's table. The spotlight operator scrambled to follow him. The audience watched in complete silence. Frank pulled out a chair and sat down across from Michael. "How long have you been back?" Frank asked. Michael's voice was barely audible. 4 months, sir." "And how are they treating you?" Michael didn't answer. He just looked down at his empty sleeve. Frank understood. He'd heard the stories. He knew what Vietnam veterans were coming home to. Not parades, not thank yous, protesters, insults, people spitting on them in airports, calling them baby killers, treating them like they'd done something wrong by serving their country. Michael Romano had given his arm for America, and America had given him nothing but contempt in return. Frank leaned forward. "You come here alone tonight?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "I heard you were performing." "My dad used to play your records when I was a kid, before he died. I wanted to hear the music again. Remember when things were simpler." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. "Come with me." Michael looked confused. "Sir?" "I said come with me. We're not done yet." Frank walked back toward the stage. Michael sat frozen. Frank turned back. "That's an order, Sergeant." Michael stood up slowly. He followed Frank to the stage. The audience was completely silent. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody moved. Frank climbed back onto the stage. He extended his hand to help Michael up. Michael climbed the steps with one arm, slightly off balance, but he made it. Frank led him to center stage, handed him a microphone. "You know the words to My Way?" Frank asked. Yes, sir. But I can't." "Yeah, you can. We're going to sing it together. You and me. Right here. Right now. In front of all these people. Because you earned it. You served your country. You sacrificed for it. And tonight, someone's going to say thank you. That someone is me." Michael's hand was shaking as he held the microphone. Frank nodded to the band. The music started again. Frank began singing, his voice strong, confident, wrapping around the words like he'd sung them 1,000 times, because he had. But this time was different. This time, he sang it for Michael. And then Frank did something beautiful. He stepped back slightly and pointed the microphone toward Michael, inviting him to sing. Michael's voice was quiet at first, shaky, uncertain, but Frank kept nodding. Keep going. Keep singing. You belong here." And slowly, Michael's voice grew stronger. He sang about doing things his way, about facing challenges, about standing tall, about having no regrets. His voice wasn't perfect. It cracked in places. But it was real. It was honest. It was the voice of a man who'd been through hell and somehow survived. Frank joined him again. Their voices blended. Two men from different generations, different worlds, singing together about resilience, about pride, about refusing to bow. When the song ended, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the entire showroom erupted. 1,200 people rose to their feet, applauding, whistling, cheering. Some were crying. Michael stood there, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. Frank put his arm around Michael's shoulders, held him close, whispered something in his ear that the audience couldn't hear. Michael nodded. Wiped his eyes with his one hand. Frank turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sergeant Michael Romano. He served in Vietnam. He gave his arm defending this country. And when he came home, instead of being treated like the hero he is, he was treated like garbage. That ends tonight." The applause grew louder. Frank continued. "I don't care what you think about the war. I don't care about politics. But I care about this. This young man did what his country asked him to do. He served with honor. He sacrificed everything. And he deserves our respect. He deserves our gratitude. He deserves better than what he's been getting." Frank looked at Michael. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant Romano. Thank you for your sacrifice. And thank you for having the courage to show up here tonight. Even though the world hasn't been kind to you." The standing ovation continued for 5 full minutes. Michael stood there, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. Frank shook his hand, then pulled him into a hug. When Frank finally let him go, Michael walked off stage. But he didn't go back to his table. He stood in the wings, watching, and Frank continued his show. But something had changed. The energy in the room was different, heavier, more meaningful. Before we continue, I'm curious. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story has traveled. After the show, Frank went to his dressing room. Michael was waiting outside in the hallway. "Mr. Sinatra, I don't know what to say." Frank lit a cigarette. "You don't have to say anything, kid. Why did you do that?" "You didn't have to stop your show for me." "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Frank looked at Michael. Really looked at him. "You know how old I am?" "No, sir. I'm 55. I was too young for World War I, and by the time World War II came around, I had a medical exemption. Punctured eardrum. So I never served. I never went to war. I never had to face what you faced. That doesn't mean, let me finish. I never served. But I've spent my whole career performing for guys who did. I've done USO tours. I've sung for soldiers in hospitals. I've seen what war does to people. And I've always felt like I owed them something. Like I needed to give back because I didn't give what they gave." Frank took a drag from his cigarette. "When I saw you sitting out there tonight, alone, trying to disappear, I saw every soldier I've ever performed for. Every guy who came back broken and got treated like he was the problem. And I couldn't just keep singing and pretend I didn't see you. I couldn't do that. You changed my life tonight, Mr. Sinatra. No, kid, you changed mine." They stood there in silence for a moment. Then Frank said, "You got anywhere to be right now?" "No, sir." "Good. Come have a drink with me." Frank and Michael sat in Frank's dressing room for 2 hours. They talked about everything, about the war, about coming home, about what it felt like to be treated like an outsider in your own country, about loss, about pain, about survival. Michael told Frank about losing his arm. It happened during an ambush outside Da Nang, shrapnel from a grenade. He remembered the explosion, the pain, the medic screaming for help. He remembered waking up in a hospital 3 days later and realizing his arm was gone. The physical pain was bad, Michael said. But it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was coming home and realizing that nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to know what I'd been through. They just wanted me to disappear. What about your family? My mom tries, but she doesn't understand. And my dad's gone, so. Michael trailed off. I've been pretty much on my own since I got back. Frank poured them both another drink. You're not on your own anymore. Sir? I'm going to make some calls, get you connected with some people. There are veteran support groups, good people who understand what you're going through. And I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. You need a job? I'll find you one. You need a place to stay? I'll set it up. You need anything, you call me. Understand? Michael's eyes filled with tears again. Mr. Sinatra, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. And when Frank Sinatra offers you something, you say yes. Michael smiled. Yes, sir. Over the next few months, Frank kept his promise. He connected Michael with veteran organizations. He helped him get a job working at one of the casinos Frank had connections with. He made sure Michael had an apartment, that he had support, that he wasn't alone. But Frank did something else too. Something bigger. He started speaking publicly about Vietnam veterans, about how they were being treated, about how wrong it was. In interviews, at concerts, at public events, Frank used his platform to advocate for veterans. These men and women served their country, Frank said in a televised interview in 1972. They did what they were asked to do, and now they're being spit on, insulted, and ignored. That's not just wrong, it's un-American. We owe them better. We owe them everything. Frank's advocacy didn't make him popular with everyone. Some people criticized him, said he was supporting an unjust war, said he should stay out of politics. But Frank didn't care. This isn't about politics, Frank would say. This is about honor. This is about treating people with dignity. These veterans didn't start the war. They just fought in it. And they deserve our respect. In 1973, Frank performed at a benefit concert for wounded Vietnam veterans. The entire concert was dedicated to raising money for medical care and rehabilitation. Michael Romano was there. He'd been helping organize the event. When Frank took the stage, he told the story of that night in 1971, about stopping his show, about bringing Michael on stage, about singing together. That moment changed me, Frank said. It reminded me what really matters. Not record sales, not awards, not fame. What matters is standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. What matters is saying thank you to the people who sacrificed for us. The concert raised over $2 million, and it started a movement. Other celebrities began speaking up for veterans. More organizations formed to help returning soldiers. Slowly, the narrative began to change. If you're still with me, let me know where you're watching from. Comment your location below. I love seeing how global our audience is. Years later, in 1995, Michael Romano was asked to speak at a veterans event. By then, he was in his late 40s. He'd built a successful career. He'd gotten married, had kids. He'd built a life. During his speech, he was asked about that night in 1971 with Frank Sinatra. People ask me all the time what it felt like to sing with Frank Sinatra, Michael said. And I tell them it was incredible. It was a dream. But that's not what mattered. What mattered was that Frank saw me. In a room full of 1,200 people, he saw me. He saw my pain. He saw my sacrifice. And he decided to do something about it. That night, I was drowning. I was ready to give up. I'd lost my arm. I'd lost my sense of purpose. I'd lost my country's respect. I felt like I didn't matter. Like nobody cared whether I lived or died. And then Frank Sinatra stopped his show. He walked off that stage, he sat down at my table, and he reminded me that I did matter, that my sacrifice meant something, that someone saw me, that someone cared. Michael's voice cracked. Frank Sinatra saved my life that night, not metaphorically, literally, because if he hadn't done what he did, I don't think I would have made it much longer. I was in a dark place, and he pulled me out. With a song, with kindness, with respect. So when people ask me what it was like to sing with Frank Sinatra, I tell them it was the night I remembered I was human. The night I remembered I mattered. The night someone told me thank you. And I'll be grateful for that for the rest of my life. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community of people who love untold history, and I don't want you to miss the next one. Frank Sinatra died in 1998. At his funeral, there were hundreds of people, celebrities, politicians, industry giants. But there was also a group of about 50 men and women, all veterans, all people Frank had helped over the years. Michael Romano was among them. He gave a eulogy. Frank Sinatra was a lot of things, Michael said. He was a singer, an actor, a legend. But to me, and to the people standing here with me today, he was something more. He was a friend. He was an advocate. He was someone who saw us when the world refused to look. Frank didn't have to help us. He didn't owe us anything. But he did it anyway. Because that's who he was. A man who stood up for people. A man who used his power for good. A man who never forgot that fame and success mean nothing if you don't use them to help others. I lost my arm in Vietnam. But I found my purpose because of Frank Sinatra. He showed me that my sacrifice mattered, that I mattered, and he spent the rest of his life making sure other veterans knew they mattered too. So tonight, as we say goodbye to Frank, I want to say thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for standing up for us. Thank you for reminding us that we're heroes, even when the world forgot. You saved my life, Frank, and I'll never forget that. The story of Frank Sinatra and Michael Romano is about more than one moment on a stage in Las Vegas. It's about what happens when someone with power chooses to use it for good. It's about recognizing pain and responding with compassion. It's about standing up when everyone else is sitting down. Frank Sinatra could have kept singing that night. He could have ignored Michael Romano. Nobody would have blamed him. It was just another show, just another audience. But Frank didn't ignore him. Frank saw a young man who'd sacrificed everything and gotten nothing in return. And Frank decided to change that. With one song, one gesture, one moment of humanity. That's the real power of Frank Sinatra. Not his voice, not his fame, not his legacy in music. The real power was his willingness to stop, to see, to act, to care. Michael Romano wasn't the only veteran Frank helped. There were hundreds, maybe thousands. Men and women who came back from war broken, forgotten, discarded. And Frank Sinatra made sure they were seen, that they were heard, that they were valued. He used his platform. He used his influence. He used his voice for something bigger than himself. That's heroism, not the kind that happens on a battlefield, but the kind that happens in everyday moments, when someone decides that another person's pain matters more than their own comfort, when someone decides that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. Frank Sinatra did the right thing that night in 1971, and he kept doing it for the rest of his life. That's the legacy. Not the records, not the movies, not the awards. The legacy is the lives he changed, the veterans he helped, the message he sent to America. Respect the people who serve. Honor the people who sacrifice. Never forget the people who gave everything. December 15th, 1971, Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas. Frank Sinatra stopped singing My Way and walked into the audience. He sat down with a wounded soldier. He brought him on stage. He sang with him. And he changed everything. For Michael Romano. For thousands of veterans. For an entire generation that had been forgotten. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the night Frank Sinatra proved that one person can make a difference. That one moment of kindness can save a life. That one voice raised in defense of the voiceless can change the world. Frank Sinatra sang My Way 1,000 times, but he never sang it better than he did that night. With a young sergeant who'd lost his arm, with a wounded warrior who'd lost his hope, with a hero who'd been forgotten. Together, they sang about doing things their own way, about standing tall, about facing challenges, about having no regrets. And in doing so, they reminded everyone watching that some things matter more than music, more than fame, more than anything. Dignity, respect, honor, gratitude. Thank you, Sergeant Michael Romano, for your service. And thank you, Frank Sinatra, for never forgetting what really mattered.